So you'll notice in this code that I'm referring directly to Mark pointer name, Jill pointer name, and I'm setting name and gender and year and so on from code outside of the class. And the reason I can do that is because of this public thing right here. So public means that any bit of code anywhere that has an object can set or access any of these property values. And when you're starting out, this is certainly the easiest way to get started, but there's a big drawback to making everything public. And that is that if you release something and you make it public, that means that other programmers are going to use it, which means that you can't change these things anymore. So for example, right now, anybody can set the total on any object that I provide to them. But ultimately, this total and this count, they're going to be coming from a database. So I don't want people to just change these values, because if they change the value, I won't know that to update the database. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to force everybody to go through methods in order to set or get the value of any of these properties. So instead of setting name directly, you'll have to call a method called setName, and then setName will set this property, but it can do other things. Like it can make sure that it knows that this particular object has a different value than when it started out, so that when the object goes away, it can flush those changes to the database. So what might a method to setName look like? Call it function setName, and it's going to take a new name value, and it's just going to set this pointer name equal value. And then a function to get the name value doesn't take any parameters, and it just returns this pointer name. So that's pretty simple, and I can go ahead and I can use them in test.me. So I'm going to go ahead and call Jill pointer get name here, and I'm going to call Jill pointer set name of Jill. So now this is using the methods I've provided, and this is called a setter, or sometimes a mutator, because it's changing the value. And this is sometimes called either a getter or an accessor. And if I go ahead and run the code, it should work exactly the same. And it does. I get the same results for Jill as I did before, even though now I'm using my setter and getter. But what about Mark? Mark is still trying to set and get the value of name directly. And I just said I didn't want that to happen, because now I know that Jill has been modified. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create another bit. And then if I call setName, now when I set the value of name for Jill, it will be dirty. But if I set the value of name for Mark by changing this property directly, it won't be dirty, and I won't know that it needs to be flushed to the database. So let's go ahead and reload. So dirty here is true for Jill, but dirty here is false for Mark. So how can I force programmers to go through get name and set name? Well, what you want to do is make name private. And now, if you reload, you actually get a fatal error: cannot access private property name popularity record : $name on that line. So this causes a fatal error trying to set the value of a private property directly. And it's useful and important to know what's private and what's public. So I'm going to follow this naming convention. Every time I have a private property, I'm going to start it with M a lowercase m, and then the name. So anything that's $M, whatever, that's going to be a private member variable or private property. And then I'm going to use mname here and use mname here as well. And now I'm going to go back to test me, and I'm going to change mark to use getName as well. And we'll use setName here. So let's go ahead and reload. Everything's working correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm always going to make my properties private, and I'm always going to provide setters and getters. So make all of these private. And then I'm going to right-click, refactor, rename, make this mYear, and same here, refactor, rename, mGender, refactor, rename, mCount, refactor, rename, mTotal, refactor, rename, mMetaphone, refactor, rename, mDirty, and then I'm going to provide setters and getters for the ones that I want to let the user set and get. So I'll provide getters for everything. So name, year, gender, count, total, metaphone. Name, year, gender, count, total, metaphone. And then this is mYear, mGender, mCount, mTotal, mMetaphone, and then I'm also going to provide setters for these. So name, actually let me grab an extra space here. Name, year, gender, count, total, metaphone. Year, gender, count, total, metaphone. Year, oops, that was the wrong one. Year, gender, count, total, metaphone. And that should be everything. So let's go ahead and reload. Cannot access private property mGender in test me, so I have to call those setters in here. So call this set gender, set year, set count, set total, set gender, set year, set count, set total, and then in paren, Okay, so I think that's everything. Let's go ahead and reload. And it works. So now you'll see in the printer that this property is private and so on, that they're all private, which means I can't access them from outside the class. So if I try to write Jill pointer m total equal that, I get an error. But if I access it directly in the class, it works fine. So anywhere in the class I can refer to that, anywhere outside of the class I can't. And then there's one more access level called protected. So you'd write protected and something or other. And what this means is that not only this class, but any subclasses of this class that I declare can access this value. So we'll talk about that more when we get to inheritance. So what I've done by making all of these properties private and providing setter and getter methods for all of them and forcing the programmer to go through them is an object-oriented programming concept called Data Hiding Encapsulation. And it's considered one of the pillars of good object-oriented programming. It's a little more work, but it does have some advantages in terms of making your code maintainable and easy to share with other programmers.